Okay, so today we're going to be covering activity-based costing. And so what's really the goal here is what we've talked about in previous chapters were how do we use process costing and job costing and what's the purpose of managerial accounting. And the purpose of managerial accounting is really something that we can take along with us throughout life. You can't really manage something until you can measure it. And it turns out measurement is a much more complex thought than it seems at face value. And we learned about that from like a job. How do we allocate some of these abstract costs to a job in that earlier chapter? We have to find some way of tracing and making sure we have the labor hours associated with it and having some kind of predetermined overhead rate that we can allocate to it. And then it gets even more complex and abstract when we have a uniform process like bottles of water, right? How do you put one labor hour to the thousands of bottles of water that are created? And in this, we're going to try to find ways to answer some of those problems or ways to come up with good estimates, because we learned in chapters 2 and 3 that the only way to do it is to make estimates. We can't actually measure the amount of electricity used to make that one bottle of water. We don't know, but we can make estimates. And so this chapter is going to be focused on those estimates. One of the best practices when we can't have a direct evidence for the estimate is this concept of activity-based costing. It's also known as ABC, activity-based costing. So an easy way to remember it. And really the goal of this is distinguishing between overhead rates, right? Because overhead rates are the hardest to allocate. Overhead being electricity and rent, and then those costs that really we can't trace directly to a product. And distinguishing between the differences between the plant-wide, departmental, and activity-based methods that we've discussed previously, and talking about cost flows for activity-based costing, and then the main types of activities that we use to drive this information. And then we'll talk about analyzing these matters and how then to allocate it procedurally. So really the takeaway here is, if we have an abstract cost like electricity, I'm saying it's abstract because we can't apply it directly. The best way we can move forward is to assess it, attach it to an activity, right? So think about it like dieting, right? Like if we're trying to gain weight or lose weight, we know that there's two main inputs and outputs for weight, right? So the main input is eating and our diet, and the main output is like exercise. If we want to exercise, we can lose weight, and if we eat, we gain weight, right? Those are activities that we do. So like, that's what scientists have determined are the activities that correlate with gaining or reducing weight. We're trying to do the same thing here. So what are the activities? We find that if we can drill down to an activity level, we can associate costs with it. Those are most likely the drivers of the cost. So for example, if I'm going to use electricity as a driver, what could be a driver of electricity costs? Well, maybe machine hours, right? Like machines tend to use a lot of electricity. So machine hours might be a good driver of those costs. It might not fully correlate, right? When I mean correlate, it might not fully relate to the full meaning or explain the fullness of the driver or the cost, but it could be the best we have available. While if we're building bicycles, maybe it's labor hours. Like labor is the activity that most correlates with these indirect costs. So it really depends on the type of good that we're producing or our business model. And so when we're assigning overhead costs, we have to determine how we're going to assign it. And what I'm posing here is one of the better ways to assign it is at the activity level, rather than using a predetermined overhead rate, not based off activity. So remember beforehand, we said, oh, we might just take 1.2 times labor hours for all of a department. That might not be the best activity for an entire department, because each department or entire plant, because each department has different drivers, right? Like the labor assembly line has a different driver than the machining line, which might have a different driver than the shipment line, right? Everything might, so we try to break it out and match the costs to their most effective drivers in activity-based costing. So what we're saying here is we have our direct costs. We all know where they go, goods in process, which goes to finished goods. And then we know when we sell finished goods, it eventually becomes a cost of goods sold. That's kind of the flow of costs. But what about overhead costs? We've talked about the single plant-wide overhead rate before. Reminder is that we just say that whole plant, we're going to assign it at 1.2x the labor hours or machine hours for the entire plant. You might assign it by departmental overhead rates, or you could assign it by activity. And what I'm arguing is as you get more granular, like the activity, like this is very large, and we get more granular as we go, as we dive down to the activity level. This activity level is the best, a better metric, right? We want to get the most accurate estimate possible. So here's the concept is the number of rates. Plant-wide rate is one rate. Departmental rate, we use 2 or more rates depending on the number of departments. And then the activity-based costing, we use at least 2, but often many more rates to get the best answer possible. And so activities that drive costs, such as a number of batches or products produced, right? We're really getting granular here with the activity-based costing. So when you go into the business world, you can say, you can go up to a company and ask them, hey, when you get your job, oh, what kind of rate are we using? And they might say, oh, we just apply overhead costs at a plant-wide rate, right? That's what your job might tell you. And then from taking this class, you should say, oh, have we thought about departmental rates or activity-based costing? Have we thought about that? And if they say no, then from this class, you might be able to apply it and save the company a lot of money. You might be able to change the pricing of the products, right? And then in theory, right, if we change the pricing of the products, maybe you can drive the prices down in the marketplace, which then benefits society, right? Like there's a huge value to understanding costs, just like there's a huge value to understanding the calories of food, or how many calories you burn, or how much money you save, or how much money you spend.